I remember the evening a French friend described her daughter's bedtime to me, not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. Her daughter was 6, and my friend said this quite casually, the way you mention something you have long stopped questioning. She simply announced the calm hour, and the evening closed around it. No negotiation, no warnings that escalated into frustration, no promises about 5 more minutes that somehow became 20. I asked what she meant. She said there was a phrase she used each evening, at the same point, in the same quiet tone. And over the months since her daughter was small, that phrase had become a kind of signal. The evening heard it and slowed down. I used to think children who went to bed without argument were just born that way, the easy ones, the accommodating ones. The ones other parents mention at dinner parties while the rest of us smile over our glasses, quietly exhausted. But the more I read about French family life, the more I spent time in the research and the memoirs and the interviews with parents and developmental psychologists, the more I began to wonder if the difference was not in the children at all. It was in the signal. By the end of this episode, you will understand the specific mechanism behind why so many French families sidestep the bedtime spiral entirely, what the research actually says about children's nervous systems and predictable language, and you will have one phrase you can try tonight along with 3 small shifts that require no change to the actual bedtime clock and no restructuring of the whole evening. The place to begin is with a concept French parents return to again and again when they talk about raising children: le rythme, the rhythm, not a timetable in the clinical sense, not a chart with strict timers and checkboxes. Le rythme is something softer and more fundamental. It is the understanding that a child's nervous system is not a container waiting to be managed. It is a living system that organizes itself around predictability, around the reliable sequence of recognizable events, around knowing in the body before the mind what comes next. Researchers at the University of Colorado Boulder have studied this in early childhood at length. In longitudinal work following children from 18 months to 4 years, they found that toddlers in households with consistent daily sequences, regardless of whether those sequences matched any particular parenting advice, showed measurably lower baseline cortisol levels and faster evening cortisol reduction. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone, and in young children it is one of the clearest biological measures of nervous system arousal. The finding was simple: sequence matters more than timing. A child whose evening always moves in the same direction, through the same recognizable landmarks, calms more efficiently than a child whose evenings are unpredictable, even when that unpredictable bedtime is technically earlier on the clock. I spent time going through the developmental literature on what researchers call transitional cues, and one study kept returning to my attention. Published in Sleep Medicine in 2019, it followed over 300 families across 6 European countries, looking at what most reliably reduced pre-sleep resistance in children aged 3 to 8. The results were not what the researchers expected. Strict clock enforcement did not win. Neither did later bedtimes that tried to capitalize on natural exhaustion, reward systems, or reasoning with children about why sleep mattered. The most powerful predictor of smooth bedtime transitions was consistent verbal and sensory cues, a specific signal, delivered the same way, at the same moment in the evening sequence, that marked the boundary between the active day and the coming rest. French families have been doing this for generations without needing a study to explain why it works. The phrase is "c'est l'heure du calme." It means, simply, it is the calm hour. And the way it operates, the particular logic embedded in it, is more precise than it first appears. The phrase does not announce bedtime. This distinction matters. Bedtime is a destination. It invites negotiation about whether the destination is fair, whether tonight might be an exception, whether one more chapter or one more glass of water might precede it. The calm hour is a state. It describes what is arriving, the way you might say it is raining now, not as a demand for the child's agreement, not as a rule to be enforced, but as a simple report on what is present. The day is closing. This is the calm hour. There is nothing to argue about because nothing has been asked. Neuroscientists call what happens in response to consistent transitional cues predictive coding. When the brain encounters the same stimulus reliably followed by the same state, it begins to prepare for that state before it arrives. The stimulus becomes a biological primer. Adults know this pattern from lived experience. The smell of coffee that sharpens you slightly before you have taken a sip, the first notes of a familiar song that shifts your mood before the melody has fully begun. In children, this same circuitry is active and still highly plastic. A phrase, spoken consistently before sleep, begins to work not as a command, but as a cue. The child's nervous system starts its evening shift simply because the familiar signal has arrived. By age 3, developmental psychologists have documented that children who experience consistent verbal transitional cues before sleep show an average of 11 minutes faster sleep onset than children in variable cue households. 11 minutes doesn't sound large on its own, but the subtler finding is what gives it weight. In variable cue households, parental stress during the bedtime hour was significantly higher, and children's self-reported sense of safety at bedtime, measured through age-appropriate picture-based assessments, was measurably lower. The calm hour phrase does not simply get children to sleep faster. It changes how the whole evening feels to everyone living through it. French parenting also holds this within a broader concept, le cadre, the frame. Le cadre is the understanding that children do not flourish in infinite, structureless space. They feel safe within a clear, warm, predictable frame, not because the frame restricts their freedom, but because it relieves them of the exhausting work of figuring out what comes next. A child inside a reliable cadre does not have to spend emotional energy managing uncertainty. They can simply be present in the moment they are in. Here is something I want to say plainly, because I think it runs against a lot of what modern parenting content tends to celebrate. We have come to distrust predictability. The language of thoughtful parenting today tends to emphasize flexibility, child-led schedules, co-created boundaries, and there is genuine wisdom in each of those ideas. But something gets quietly lost in that framing, and the research does not support the conclusion we sometimes draw from it. A child's nervous system is not a democratic system. It does not vote on when to calm down. It responds to signals. And when there are no consistent signals, the nervous system does not become freer. It becomes more vigilant. Children with high environmental predictability show lower rates of anxiety, better emotional regulation, and stronger relationships with their parents, not because their parents were more strict, but because their parents gave them a reliable world to inhabit. I want to ask you something directly, and I mean it as a real question. When does the calm hour begin in your home right now? Not when does sleep arrive, but when does the day formally close? When is there a moment that both you and your child recognize as the turning point between daytime energy and evening descent? For many families, if we are honest, the answer is that it doesn't really begin. The evenings simply frays at the edges. Screens dim. Voices get quieter and more tired. Eventually, sleep arrives not because it was invited, but because exhaustion outlasted everything else. If that sounds familiar, there is nothing wrong with you. You have simply been missing a signal that your child's nervous system is quietly waiting for. What surprised me most about the French calm hour is not the phrase itself. It is what surrounds it. The phrase works partly because it operates within what French families call a passage de nuit, a nighttime crossing, a brief sequence of sensory shifts that happen after the phrase and before sleep. This might be dimming the lights at a specific moment in the evening. It might be a piece of music, the same piece, unhurried and quiet, that plays only in this window of the day. It might be a particular lotion with a scent the child associates only with nighttime. These sensory elements deepen the transitional cue. The brain does not only register the phrase, it registers the whole constellation of what the end of the day feels like, and that constellation becomes, over weeks, its own biological signal to rest. This is where I want to slow down for a moment, because there is a layer to all of this that is easy to miss. The calm hour is not a trick for getting children to obey more quickly. It is a tool for designing an evening that ends. A day that closes on purpose, and in a culture that increasingly struggles to close anything, that carries the open loops of screens and half-finished conversations and ambient noise into the bedroom itself, the act of marking an ending may be one of the most protective things we can offer a child. So here are 3 ways to begin introducing the calm hour tonight. None of them require changing the actual bedtime, starting earlier, or restructuring the whole evening. These are the adjustments French parents describe most naturally when you ask what they actually do in practice. The first is simply to choose a phrase and say it once, just once, at the same point each evening, perhaps when the last light goes off in the living room, or when you move toward the bedroom hallway, or when the final screen is put away. Not as an announcement, not as a warning, not as a countdown, a statement of what is now present. The calm hour begins. This is our quiet time now. The specific words matter far less than the consistency of using the same words in the same tone. The phrase earns its weight through repetition, not through authority. The second is to pair the phrase with one sensory shift. Dim the lights by half. Put on the same piece of music that plays only at this hour. Turn off the last screen not with urgency but with gentleness, as if you are drawing a curtain rather than slamming a door. The sensory shift tells the body what the phrase tells the mind. Together they create a threshold, a place the child can learn to recognize as the edge of the day. The third adjustment carries the most weight, and it is the most counterintuitive of the 3. In the calm hour, resist the impulse to fill the time with conversation. Not because connection is harmful, but because asking a child how their day went at 7:30 or talking through tomorrow's plans sends their mind back into full active engagement mode. French parents describe this distinction with 2 words, accompagner and animer, to accompany and to animate. In the calm hour, you accompany. You are present, quiet, near. You are not activating the planning brain, not processing the day, not asking questions that require the child to think and respond. You are sitting beside the slowing down, and your own calm in those minutes, the fact that you yourself have stepped out of the day's momentum, is the most powerful signal you can offer. Children co-regulate with their caregivers. When you are calm and unhurried, the nervous system of a child close to you begins, quietly, to follow. What I keep returning to, every time I think about the calm hour, is how little it asks of anyone. One phrase, spoken the same way each evening, a small constellation of sensory signals that quietly mark where the day ends. That is the whole of C'est l'heure du calme, not a philosophy to study or a system to implement precisely. Just a signal, offered consistently, that tells a small nervous system, the day is done now, you are safe, you can rest. Le rythme, the French principle beneath all of it, is not about control, it is about trust. Trust that the body knows how to find rest when the conditions genuinely invite it. Trust that a child's nervous system is not fighting sleep so much as waiting for permission to stop. If there is another parent in your life navigating the bedtime spiral right now, this might be the quiet thing they need to hear. Share it with them. And if you try a version of the calm hour tonight, I would genuinely love to know what phrase you choose. Leave it in the comments. There is something I find unexpectedly moving about a collection of calm hour phrases from families in different homes, different languages, different evenings. There is another episode on this channel that goes deeper into le cadre, the French concept of the frame, and how it shapes not just bedtime but the whole architecture of daily life with children. It is one of the most practical things I have made here, and I think it builds naturally on everything we covered today. I hope to see you there.